Ready to tackle some language myths? We're going deep on this one, uncovering the truth behind these common misconceptions. And I think you might be surprised by what we find.
Yeah.
This deep dive is going to be guided by the work of Salvador Orderica. He's a leading expert in global communication, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
And you know that myth about Eskimos having tons of words for snow?
Oh, yeah.
Well, we're going to tackle that one.
Head on.
Head on. Plus, a few more that might just make you rethink everything you thought you knew about language.
It's amazing how those myths persist, even when the reality is so much more nuanced.
Yeah, they really do. So let's start with that classic, the Eskimos and their legendary snow vocabulary.
Okay.
Is it true they have like 50 words for snow?
Okay, so here's the thing. That idea is a huge oversimplification of how Inuit languages actually work.
Okay.
It's based on a linguistic feature called polysynthesis.
Hold on. Polysynthesis. That sounds a little intimidating. Can you break that down for us?
Sure. It basically means that instead of having separate words for different types of snow, they combine multiple word elements, like roots and suffixes,
Oh, wow.
to create super descriptive terms within a single word. So imagine saying snow falling heavily.
Right.
Or snow, perfect for building all in one compact word.
Wow. That's pretty efficient. So it's not that they have a dictionary overflowing with unique snow words.
Right.
It's more like they have a really sophisticated system
Mm-hmm.
for building those descriptions on the fly.
Exactly. It's about expressing nuanced meanings in a way that's natural to their language structure.
Uh-huh.
And, this myth often leads people to believe that Inuit languages are uniquely complex.
Right.
But that's not necessarily true.
Hmm.
Think about it. English has a pretty diverse snow vocabulary, too.
That's true. Yeah.
We've got sleet powder, slush blizzard.
Yeah, we do.
The list goes on.
That's a good point. It's a good reminder that every language has its own way of expressing the world around us. And sometimes we jump to conclusions based on what sounds exotic or different.
Absolutely. And speaking of jumping to conclusions, let's move on to another myth that often trips people up. The idea of untranslatable words,
Yeah.
Those words that supposedly capture a feeling or concept so specific that no other language can quite grasp it.
Yeah, like hygge, that Danish word for cozy contentment.
Right.
Or schadenfreude, that mischievous joy you feel when someone else messes up. We don't have single words for those in English, but we can definitely relate to the feelings.
Right, and that's the key. Just because a language doesn't have a one-word translation doesn't mean the concept is alien to its speakers.
Yeah.
We might use phrases or descriptions to convey the same idea,
Right.
even if it takes a little more effort.
So it's more about capturing the nuance
Uh-huh.
and cultural context embedded in those words, rather than saying they're totally untranslatable.
Precisely. Take the Japanese word tsundoku, for example. It describes that familiar feeling of buying books and letting them pile up unread. Now tell me, have you ever experienced that?
Who hasn't? I think we've all got a bit of tsundoku going on in our lives. And that's what's so interesting about these so-called untranslatable words. They highlight those universal human experiences that connect us across cultures, even if we express them a little differently.
Mm-hmm. It's fascinating how language can reveal so much about our shared human experience. Now, let's shift gears a little bit and tackle another myth that pops up
Okay.
when we talk about languages. This time focusing on the little ones. You've probably heard the idea that babies are practically language geniuses, right?
Oh, absolutely. I've heard those stories about babies effortlessly picking up multiple languages. Like it's nothing.
Right.
Makes you wonder what happens to all that brain power as we grow up.
Right. It's true that babies have this incredible capacity for learning languages. Up until they're about 8 months old, they can actually distinguish
Wow.
between sounds from any language in the world.
Wow, that's incredible. They really are like tiny little universal decoders. But there's got to be a catch.
Yeah,
They can't be that simple.
you're right. There is a catch.
Okay.
After that 8-month mark, things start to change. Babies begin to specialize in the sounds they hear on a daily basis,
Uh-huh.
and they gradually lose the ability to differentiate sounds that aren't part of their everyday life.
So it's not that babies are born fluent in multiple languages.
Right.
It's more like they have the potential to learn any language.
Yeah.
But that potential needs to be nurtured and developed
Mm-hmm.
through consistent exposure.
Exactly. Think of it like a muscle. If you don't use it, you lose it. The same principle applies to a baby's ability to distinguish sounds. Consistent interaction and language use are absolutely key for their development.
It makes a lot more sense. It's a good reminder that language learning, even for babies, is about consistent effort and exposure, not some magical innate genius.
Right. Speaking of effort and exposure, let's move on to our final myth. One that often creates unnecessary anxiety for language learners, the belief that some languages are just inherently harder than others.
Oh, I've definitely fallen into that trap before.
Yeah.
I remember struggling with French verb conjugations back in high school and thinking, why couldn't I have just been born into a Spanish-speaking family? But I have a feeling you're going to tell me it's not that straightforward.
You are absolutely right. The perceived difficulty of a language is really relative.
Okay.
It depends on factors like your native language, your prior experience with languages, and even your learning style.
So for someone who grew up speaking English, learning Spanish or French might feel a bit easier because of the shared vocabulary and Latin roots. On the other hand, a Mandarin speaker might find Japanese more accessible. It's all about those linguistic connections, right?
Exactly. But here's the most important factor that often gets overlooked: motivation.
You mean if you're genuinely passionate about learning a language, you're more likely to overcome the challenges and stick with it, regardless of how difficult it's supposed to be.
Precisely. Someone who's deeply motivated to learn Klingon because they're a diehard Star Trek fan is going to have a much easier time than someone who's half-heartedly studying Spanish just to check a box on their resume.
That's such a great point. It really highlights the power of passion when it comes to learning.
Yeah.
So we've debunked some pretty common language myths today. But before we wrap up, I hear you have a few rapid-fire fun facts to share that might surprise our listeners.
I do. These are little nuggets of linguistic trivia that might just change the way you think about language.
All right, hit us with your best shots.
First up, let's talk about sign language. You might be surprised to learn that there is no single universal sign language. In fact, there are over 300 distinct sign languages used worldwide, each with its own unique grammar and vocabulary.
Wow, I had no idea. I always assumed there was a universal way to communicate through signs.
And for all the bookworms out there, let's debunk a Shakespearean myth. While Shakespeare was undoubtedly a linguistic genius, he didn't actually invent 1,700 words, as some people believe.
Wait, really? I always heard that he invented a ton of words we still use today.
He definitely introduced many words into mainstream English, but a lot of the words attributed to him already existed in some form. He just had this incredible ability to use language in creative and memorable ways, giving those words new life and meaning within his works.
So he was more of a linguistic innovator than a word inventor.
Exactly. And here's one final fun fact that might give language learners a bit of relief. You don't need to be a grammar guru to achieve fluency.
Really? That's a relief to hear.
Hmm.
All those years I spent memorizing verb conjugations might have been a bit overkill then.
Well, a little grammar knowledge never hurts, but fluency is really about effective communication, not about achieving perfect grammatical accuracy. Even native speakers make grammatical mistakes sometimes. The key is to be able to express yourself clearly and understand others, even if you make the occasional slip-up.
So it's more about focusing on actually using the language to communicate and connect with people, rather than getting bogged down in the technicalities.
Precisely. And if you're looking for more insightful and entertaining deep dives into the world of language, I highly recommend checking out Salvador Ordorica's Translation Tales YouTube channel.
Yes, he's the brilliant mind behind all the fascinating information we've been discussing today. And his YouTube channel is packed with expert insights, humor, and actionable strategies to help you avoid those costly international communication blunders.
He's a fantastic resource for anyone who wants to learn more about language and culture and how to navigate the complexities of global communication.
He really is.
Yeah.
And, you know, it makes me think about something we talked about earlier, the whole idea of language as having different ways of expressing the world.
Yeah.
It's easy to get caught up in thinking that our own language is the normal one and that others are somehow strange or difficult.
It's a very common bias.
Yeah.
And it often stems from a lack of exposure to other languages and cultures. The more we learn about different ways of communicating, the more we realize that there's no single right way to express ourselves.
So the next time you hear someone say, wow, that language sounds so complicated, remember it's all about perspective. What seems complex to one person might feel perfectly natural to another.
Exactly. And that brings us back to the importance of questioning those language myths and digging a little deeper into the fascinating world of linguistics.
And if you're looking for a guide on that journey, Salvador Ordorica is definitely the expert to follow. His Translation Tales YouTube channel is a treasure trove of insights, delivered with a healthy dose of humor and practical advice.
He has this knack for making even the most complex linguistic concepts accessible and engaging. You'll learn about everything from the origins of slang to the challenges of translating humor across cultures.
Plus, he shares some fantastic tips on how to avoid those awkward or embarrassing communication blunders that can happen when you're interacting with people from different backgrounds.
It's a must-watch for anyone who's interested in language culture and the art of communication.
Well, that about wraps up our deep dive into language myths. We've busted some misconceptions, explored the wonders of the human brain, and hopefully left you with a newfound appreciation for the power and diversity of language.
And remember, the journey of language exploration doesn't end here. Keep asking questions, challenge assumptions, and never stop being curious about the amazing ways we communicate with each other.